Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to give you an overview of the Temple University Collab. So the Temple University Collaborative on Community Inclusion is a research lab that is actively involved in research and knowledge development to support the full and meaningful community participation of individuals with mental illnesses. My name is Leah Coder, and I'm a junior at Temple University majoring in public health and work as a research assistant at the Temple Collaborative on Community Inclusion. Today, I will be interviewing Dr. Brian McCormick on mattering among patients who have serious mental illness. McCormick is a professor in the Health and Rehabilitation Science Department of Temple University. His research mainly focuses on the role of everyday social and community functioning in health and well-being for adults with serious mental illness. So first of all, I would like to dive into the whole topic of mattering. So what specifically made you interested in the topic of mattering?
So I actually came to this concept as a result of a graduate student I worked with quite a few years ago. I've always been interested in the aspects of social connection and some of the challenges that people with mental health conditions have in establishing social connections and really the benefits of social connections. And some of the earliest work that I did really focused on social support. I did some early work in Alcoholics Anonymous and really came to see how people, by telling their stories, were able to make sense of sort of a very challenging history and at times very chaotic life. And what I came to really be interested in was how people made sense of the world socially. They interacted with each other and they checked with each other on, like, this is what I'm seeing, is this what you're seeing, which led me to the concept of social support. And so some of the early work I did with adults with serious mental illness in community living arrangements or group homes looked at social support available to people. And so most social support measures will ask people like, who could you turn to if you needed a ride? If you had some real bad news, who would you turn to support you emotionally? Who supports who you are? And so we ask lots of questions about who can you turn to for support, but we never ask the reverse. Who turns to you for a ride? Who turns to you for support? Who turns to you for information? And really started to think about the challenges of what it meant if you exist in a social world in which you have all these supporters, but nobody turns to you for support. What does that say about your standing and your relationship to the world around you, and how challenging it can be if you are not needed? And really, this is the origin of the project that we're currently working on, and it's called Need to Be Needed. But it comes from this idea of, it may be great that people care about you and you have people to turn to, but if nobody needs you in their life, what does it say? And mattering is really this idea that not only that people are aware of us and consider us important, but there is a reliance element that when people rely on us, it says something about our role in the world. And that's really where we came to this idea of mattering is that while we may be able to look at one of the aspects of social support, that is the provision or availability of support, we don't often look at how often I am the one who is needed to provide support for others. And so that's really where we came to this idea of mattering. Um, and there's been some interesting work too that has really advocated that even in studies of loneliness, there are lots of measures of loneliness. Two of the common ones are the UCLA loneliness scale and Dijon-Gervold loneliness scale. But what's not included in those is this idea of neededness or reliance. And so, this is really a component of loneliness. It isn't just, the issue of, emotional dissatisfaction with the relationships we have, but to what extent are we needed in the world that we live? So that's really how we came to this idea of mattering as a key construct in addressing loneliness.
Well, thank you. That was a very interesting way to look at mattering through a different perspective. I actually never thought of it that way. So it was interesting to hear your insight on that. And the second question I would like to ask is what inspired you to research the topic in mattering in people specifically with serious mental illness?
Well, one of the reasons that we're interested in supporting folks with serious mental illness, and I've worked my entire career in working in psychiatric populations and adults with serious mental illness. So those folks who experience typically bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and schizophrenia spectrum disorders, which can be highly disruptive to people's lives. These are conditions that typically are identified in late adolescence and early adulthood, and can have significant disruption in people's life course in the roles and transitions they go through. It can be disruptive to relationships and partnering. It can be disruptive to one's vocational experiences, educational experiences. And so these things, these disorders really disrupt people's lives in significant ways. And so really looking at the long-term impact that folks with serious mental illness experience and significant health conditions that really threaten life expectancy among this population in quite dramatic ways has really led us to look at how social connection is really one of these major components. And it's interesting because a lot of times we just think about social connection as being sort of emotional in nature, right? But what we're finding more and more is that lack of adequate and meaningful social connection has impacts on our physiological health. It isn't just emotional health and that's affected. It really, there are physiological processes that go on, a lot of it related to stress reactions that when someone exists in a chronic stress experience, it starts to erode health in many ways. A lot of it is related to the chronic stress activation is implicated in a lot of cardiovascular disease, but there's also some elements related to a degradation of our ability to really use cognitive abilities, and talks about cognitive reserve. But as a result of having, this constant sort of stress, concern, vigilance, we take less attention to our own health. And so we see great obesity, inactivity, alcohol consumption, a variety of factors. And so really within this population of adults experiencing serious mental illness, we see a lot of significant health conditions. We recently published a work on the prevalence of loneliness and severe loneliness among adults with serious mental illness, and it affects the majority of people who experience serious mental health conditions, and so presents a significant threat. This whole issue of isolation and loneliness has been identified as an epidemic within the United States with real public health concerns. And the U.S. Surgeon General just issued an advisory on this issue in May of 2023. So it's not just within adults with serious mental illness, but the prevalence of this issue is much greater in this population.
And so also, I just wanted to ask, so why do you think mattering is important? And why do you think it's a key component in people with serious mental illness?
So mattering is important because it's really been identified in multiple populations as what one investigator called a generalized resistance resource. It's something that helps us to function and be able to adapt when faced with adversity. People who feel like they matter really survive the COVID-19 pandemic better than people who felt they didn't matter. They're more able to resist challenges and negative experiences. And so mattering really gives us a sense that we are important in some ways to the world and the people around us. And it isn't just relationships. We can consider ourselves important to other things too. Pets are one of the examples of that, wherein we are both relied upon and important to those pets because they in fact need us. There's a dependency there. And so really that's one of the reasons that we started to look at mattering as an important way that people can build a sense that that they aren't irrelevant in the worlds in which they live. And one of the things that's most important, I think, about mattering as a construct is that mattering really can be cultivated. That's I think one of the keys. You know, we were our project was in response to a call to address isolation and loneliness among people with disabilities, and we've identified that this is highly prevalent among adults with serious mental illness. But loneliness in itself is really more of a symptom than anything else. And that's what approach we've taken, is that this is a symptom of a problem. It's not the problem itself. And so through the construct of mattering, through something that can be cultivated and developed, we actually are able to um, make a difference, be able to change the way people feel that they matter, as a way to try and address the symptoms of loneliness, that people feel greater social connection, and they feel to be more a part of the world in which they live.
Yeah, that actually is very interesting how you mentioned that loneliness, like it's actually a symptom. So like I definitely did not see it that way. So like I never realized that like loneliness like actually isn't the problem, but it's rather like a product and symptom of something. So
Mhm.
like that was a very interesting way to put it. And also, do you think that there's other factors that play a role into why people don't matter?
There's a lot of there are a lot of factors. Some of it is social. One of the things we know about mattering is that there are some cultures that foster a sense of mattering and some that don't. You know, one of the ways to think about it is this idea that one of the theorists by the name of Isaac Brzezinski talks about is me cultures versus we cultures. In me cultures, individual achievement and personal rights are at the forefront. In we cultures, there's much more a sense of collective responsibility and really supporting everyone. Adults with serious mental illness oftentimes exist in situations in which they, because of their exclusion from many of the domains of whether it's work or education, really exist in sort of a world in which they have few economic resources, which puts them at a disadvantage compared to the rest of society. And so they may be devalued. And so that's really, I think, one of the things as we start to think about culturally, we don't value people. And oftentimes there is a significant stigma associated with mental health conditions in many societies, not just the United States, but in virtually all societies, there is this stigma. And this really results in sort of a condition of devaluation of folks who have certain health conditions. So it makes it more difficult to matter when you are somebody who is outside and excluded and have few opportunities and few resources. You know, this isn't necessarily a precondition, but you know, we've heard folks with serious mental illness when we were talking about the beginnings of this project who felt the reason it was hard for them to have relationship is because they didn't have much to offer, meaning they were relatively poor, and so they weren't sure what they could bring to a relationship.
But yeah, I definitely do see how other factors can definitely play into why people don't matter. So like it was very interesting to like hear about those other factors because I definitely do think there's a lot of reasons why people unfortunately don't feel like they matter.
Mhm.
And then I would like to move on to the three core concepts of mattering, which include awareness, where people see us and pay attention, importance, where people think that we are important to them, and reliance, where other people can depend on us.
Mhm.
And how would you define each of these components of mattering?
Well, one of the first one is awareness that people have to see us. Another of the theorists in the area of mattering, Gordon Flett, has really started to talk about what he calls an anti-mattering scale. But it goes to this idea of not just that some people feel that they are in fact invisible to other people. And so this is this awareness component, right? If people don't even know that we exist, if they don't even see us, it's difficult to matter. I mean, this idea of mattering is also about having a voice. And if we're not even visible to other people, it's hard to have a voice when nobody knows we exist. And so the awareness component really is that other folks at least acknowledge or recognize that we exist. And this is really one of the also the cultural sort of environmental problems, like that there are groups that don't exist in the mainstream of society. And this is problematic when it comes to the cultural level, but at the individual level, there are people who feel that they are invisible. And we can think about ways in which we just don't see people, right? The importance then is that not only are people aware, but something about what we do is important to other people. And it may be the values we hold, it may be the things we do, it may be the things we say, but these have some degree of importance for other people and other parts of our world. And so it is one thing to be that people are aware of us or take notice of us, but it's also has to do with the degree to which what we do or who we are is important to another person. This is really one of the challenges of mattering, and it's not surprising that that mattering is actually one of the elements that many suicide prevention initiatives have really identified to encourage people that they matter, they're not invisible, right? That other people care about them. And then the last component, this is the reliance component that we've really focused in on, and that's this need to be needed or neededness. That the degree to which other people rely on us is important. And it's important because this is the nature of a reciprocal relationship in which we have a give and take, right? We provide, this goes back to the social support ideas that I was talking about. We provide support as much as we receive support. And so the relationships we have are not one-sided. They are both giving and receiving relationships. And that this is really one of the keys in this idea of mattering. We see that there are certain populations that are more disadvantaged when it comes to this. You know, some of the highest rates of loneliness are among late adolescence and early adulthood. But when you think about late adolescence particularly, the opportunities for adolescents to do something or be relied upon or be needed is actually a little bit more limited than it is in other parts of life. Similarly, as people age and disconnect from some of the social environments and networks and worlds in which they were highly needed, whether it was as a parent, whether it was as an employee, you know, those types of things, as we become disconnected from those things, this idea of reliance or being needed may be severed in some ways. And so this is another population where that's really challenged.
Absolutely. And so I also wanted to ask, how does this relate to people with mental health conditions? And um, how does like these components of mattering specifically relate to people with serious mental illness?
Well, I think what we're focusing in on is particularly the reliance component, and that really is, you know, to what extent can we support people to engage in behaviors and activities that enhance their sense of neededness, that enhance the reliance. There's definitely an issue of awareness and importance, and that a lot of times people who have significant health conditions oftentimes get excluded from certain aspects of life, and it makes it harder for them to feel like that people notice them or actually consider them important. But one of the ideas is really around, you know, the extent to which people can do something that matters, that is needed by someone else. You know, a real interesting story as a result of some of the work that we've been doing is a colleague indicated that her mother had to go into a supported living situation, and she had an older brother who had always had some challenges and kind of had the life experiences of many people with serious mental illness, in which they, you know, really had a difficult time keeping a job, and but they were part of a family, but it wasn't really, they weren't really a functioning part of the family. And what this colleague told me was that when her mother went into the supported living, her brother was now responsible for bringing her the paper every day. And while this is really a very small and very simple sort of a thing, it goes to the fact of, you know, providing someone an opportunity to do something that supports others that is needed, and they can be recognized for that. And so it doesn't have to be something huge. It really is thinking about ways in which we can support people to engage in these things that other people notice, that other people need, and helps people to feel like they're making a difference.
Yeah, and what would you recommend to people to feel like they mattered more? Like, is there like a specific intervention like you think that would like help other people feel like they just mattered?
Well, one of the things that we're focused on is supporting people to engage in volunteer behavior, particularly volunteer behavior that supports their own personal interests, regardless of what area that might be in. And so some people volunteer to support animals. Other people may volunteer in things that help others to obtain food or citizens returning from incarceration, or there are a whole variety of opportunities for people to engage in voluntary behavior. But again, it's an opportunity to give back in a way that helps people to feel like they're making a difference. There are lots of ways, though, that we can also help to enhance mattering in the world around us. And part of it is just simply noticing people, not allowing people to be invisible, to say hello to people, just to acknowledge that people exist, even in your everyday world. Store clerks, people, I take a train, I always say hello to the people at the ticket counters. And, I just to acknowledge that people are there, and that there's somebody that's not invisible, and that they're important. The other thing we really look at is how to support gratitude. I know from my own experience of in doing some study abroad in Europe, Eastern Europeans always say, "You Americans say thank you too much." But it's a part of just the world here, is that to acknowledge people and provide gratitude for what people do for you on a daily basis. That's one of the ways to encourage and help to support that people know that they matter, and that work they do is valued.
Yeah, those are definitely like good solutions to help people feel like they mattered more. And just by saying hi, just, simple things like that can really make a big change in people's lives.
Mhm.
And I just was wondering, so aside from like the interventions that can help people feel like they mattered more, what do you think is like not the most helpful thing for people to feel like they mattered?
Well, there are a lot of things that people do unintentionally that convey that people don't matter. One of the documents that we have created really has come across from the lived experiences of adults with serious mental illness. And one of the stories that always stuck in my mind was a woman who indicated that a psychiatrist had asked her to arrive at the office 15 minutes before her appointment. And when she did so, she found that the office was locked. This was in the winter, and she had her children. And so this woman now is outside with her children in the wintertime, waiting for the psychiatrist to open the office. And so that action really conveyed a sense of, you don't matter. I don't see you as a person. And as a result, I don't really consider your needs. And this happens frequently. Frequently, by in by lack of consideration, many organizations, services, even supervisors can convey that people don't matter, not intentionally, but they don't think about how their actions really convey that people aren't important to them.
But yeah, that definitely like must have been really hard for that lady. Like it definitely like feels like they kind of just treat them like a number and like people just don't matter. So I could definitely see that not really being the most helpful solution
Yeah.
into making people feel like they matter more. And I just wanted to ask about this specific question.
Mhm.
So there's a study from the American Psychiatric Association that states that music therapy has improved the function of depressed individuals. I actually have previously worked as a music therapist assistant at a
Mhm.
veterans hospital in Virginia, and I've had the opportunity to work with people who suffer from PTSD and depression.
Mhm.
And I know like I don't know if you're like much about music therapy, but I was wondering if you could possibly see music therapy as a potential intervention to increase mattering and to help people with serious mental illness who face loneliness and isolation.
Well, I think there are a lot of activity-based therapies that could be used to engage folks. My background is actually as a recreation therapist. I work with music therapists. I work with art therapists. Occupational therapists engage in activity-based interventions as well. So all of those can provide some opportunities for people to use their talents and skills in ways that others recognize and consider important. And so this is actually one of the ways to build a sense of mattering also, right? That when
Hmm.
people are recognized for what they can do as opposed to what they can't do, it provides an opportunity for them to build this sense of feelings of others see them, others consider them important, and value them. And so music therapy is certainly one of those components that can be used in that way. It also provides an opportunity. Many of these activity-based approaches also provide opportunities for people to connect around shared interests, right? Whether it's a shared form of music, a shared form of art, or a recreation activity, any of those things are things that allow people to connect around an activity. Um, and so, and so I definitely see that in terms of ways through which music therapy, art therapy, recreation therapy, occupational therapy, all of these can be used to help people connect and enhance a sense of mattering and improving social connection.
Yeah, those are all very good solutions. Like I know music therapy has really helped a lot of people,
Mhm.
and it's also helped me. So like it's just very interesting to hear that there's so many different forms of therapy that can help other people. So that definitely was very interesting to hear. And I was also wondering if you were to give any advice to a person struggling with a serious mental health condition who faces loneliness and isolation, what type of advice would you give them?
Well, one of the things that that we really encourage is that there is value in simply getting out of the house. This is something that we've done some research on, and it's a challenge. I mean, I think for many people, um, if you are disconnected from the things that get other adults out of the house, work, education, relationships, all of these sorts of things, these are all things that when disconnected from those, you may not have a reason to leave the house. And we know that this is not actually good for folks. Not only is it enhanced social isolation, but it really results in some cognitive challenges in the sense that we're just not out in the world, interacting in the world and using our cognitive abilities. And so we know that that's a concern. So one of the first things really is just finding ways and reasons to get out and do things in the community. The other thing we know is that it's one of the best ways to build social relationships is really through shared recreation and leisure interests, simply because people are already have a common interest, and that's through common interest that relationships build. Um, you know, young, I would say, young kids, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds will approach somebody and say, "Will you be my friend?" But as adults, we don't do that. In fact, if we do that, people consider us unusual, right? And so instead, one of the ways to build these connections is to find common interests and engage in those things that other people engage in, and find ways to connect with people around a shared interest. Through this and through this contact over time, we can build strong social connections that really mitigate loneliness and help us to feel like we really matter to someone else.
But yeah, that's definitely very good advice to give someone. Like I definitely feel like staying home and not leaving the house, like that definitely has increased depression rates. And I know it's like easier said than done, but I feel like
Mhm.
getting out of the house like really helps because it helps people who face isolation, like potentially like they can form new connections. So like I do think that's a simple thing, like just getting out of your room can
Mhm.
really make a big difference in people with SMI.
Yeah,
But I think those are all my questions, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time for conducting this interview on Mattering. And yeah, that's about it. So I just wanted to thank you.
great. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.